Hi everyone. In this video lecture, I'm going to talk about software process model. And in particular, we are going to see about the waterfall model. So what is the software process? So a set of activities that has to be carried out in order to develop a software system is actually called as a software process. So there are many different software processes that are involved in developing a software system. We have specification where we define what the system has to do. And then the next step is a design and implementation where you define the organization of the system and the implementation of the system. And you try to validate that particular system, checking out what the customer really wants. And then we try to move into the step of evolution, which is changing the system in response to changing customer needs. And a software process model is defined as an abstract representation of a process. It presents a description of a process from some particular perspective. So when we try to describe and discuss the processes, we usually talk about its activities. And in these processes, we try to specify a data model. And then you also try to define an user interface and how the ordering of all these activities actually takes place when you try to specify a data model. So the process descriptions include products, which are the outcomes of a process activity, and their roles, which reflect the responsibilities of the people involved in the process, and then the pre and the post conditions, which are the statements that are true and true before and after a process activity has been enacted or a product has been produced. So these are the three different process descriptions that is included in any software process model. And talking about the different processes, we have two different types of processes. One is actually called as plan-driven processes, and the other one is the agile processes. In plan-driven processes, all the process activities are planned in advance, and the progress is measured against this particular plan. So, and in agile process, planning is incremental, and it is easier to change the process to reflect changing customer requirements. So, in agile process, uh, based upon the changing customer requirements, the process planning is actually incremental. And you will also know, and you'll also come to know whether the software that is being built is right or wrong. So these are all the software processes and the software process descriptions which are involved in building a software system. So in order to build the software system, we need to follow a life cycle called as a software development life cycle. And this software life cycle model is a pictorial and diagrammatic representation of a software life cycle. And this life cycle model, it represents all the methods required to make a software product transit through its life cycle stages. And it also captures the structure in which these methods have to be undertaken. So here we find that this is actually going to be the software development life cycle. We start with the requirements analysis. So that's the first stage. And then we move on to defining the requirements. And you try to design the different stages. And then the coding part, which is the next stage. And then the testing part, and then you try to deploy, and then you have the maintenance stage. So it actually, this particular software development lifecycle, it consists of 7 stages, which includes all these different stages. And then the software product is actually going to be evolved, and then it's actually going to be maintained as well. So in order to substantiate this software process models or the SDLC models, we have different types of SDLC models. Like we have the waterfall model, which is the first model. We have the RAD model, spiral model, V model, incremental model, agile model, iterative model, and big man model. So in this particular lecture, we will be focusing more on the waterfall model. So the first model is the waterfall model, and this waterfall model follows a plan-driven model. That means the planning process takes place at the initial stage itself. And we also have a separate and distinct phases of specification and development. And it's mostly heavily oriented towards documentation. It is documentation intensive. You can also say that it is documentation intensive. And also the progress is often measured through documentation completion and reviews. So that's how the progress is actually measured, through the documentation completion and through the different reviews that is involved at each and every stage in the software development. We also have Gantt charts. It follows a local lockstep approach and a little chance for change, because at each and every stage, the stage will actually be locked. Okay, so there is a little chance for stage, and oftentimes, oftenly they discover the major flaws too late. At the end only, you will be able to discover it, and it is delivered as Big Bang, and it still exists in spades, but modified. It's actually modified to a degree. So this is actually the waterfall model. You find that there is a requirements definition, then you have the system and software design, implementation and unit testing, on integration and system testing, and the last stage is the operation and maintenance. And you also find, we also notice that there is feedback loops at each and every stage. There is a feedback that will be given, and you try to modify any changes in the reviews that is actually given. You try to modify, or you try to change certain things after the feedback session. And in the waterfall model, there are separate identified phases in the waterfall model. As I told you, like you have the requirements analysis and definition, you have the system and software design, implementation and unit testing, integration and system testing, and operation and maintenance. So the major drawback of the waterfall model is the difficulty of accommodating change after the process is underway. In principle, a phase has to be complete before moving on to the next phase. When you want to move from one phase to the next phase, the previous phase has to be completed. It has to be complete. Then only you can actually move on to the next phase. And we also have issues like risk addressing is also an issue here. And the different problems that are encountered in the waterfall model is inflexible partitioning of the project into distinct stages, makes it difficult to respond to changing customer requirements. You cannot actually partition the project into distinct stages. So that's fairly a problem. And a few business systems have stable requirements because the customer requirements change. So, this becomes difficult to adapt. And the waterfall model is mostly used for larger systems engineering projects where a system is developed at several sites. And in those circumstances, the plan-driven nature of the waterfall models helps coordinate the work. So this is about the first model in SDLC, that is a waterfall model. And thank you for listening to this lecture.